You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 221 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj Bhojwani as always, except that he's in Singapore and you won't see him on video if you're watching YouTube. But Pankaj, how are you?
I'm all right. As you said, I flew over to Singapore, so that's where I am right now, in the blazing heat, with all the amazing food that this country has. Obviously, because, my family's here, so I kind of just came a bit early. I'm leaving later as well, after the Pro Tour, just to spend time with my family. It's kind of just like my annual trip to Singapore, basically, and there's a Pro Tour within it. No video. I'm using my little travel mic as well, so hopefully the audio isn't
That's good.
too much worse.
It's pretty clean.
Terrible. All right, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, that's been. I guess that has been my week in Flesh and Blood. I've been trying to keep tabs on the team's testing, which has been a little bit tougher because of the time difference. I typically wake up and then people are like finishing up like the testing session.
True.
I can join in, tune into like the last couple of games and like frantically catch up on what people were messaging about in the Discord. But yeah, soon in a couple of days, as the time of this recording, and I'm super excited. Going to introduce them to the great food here, and also just can't wait to just start jamming games in real life.
Yeah,
really looking forward to it.
I started playing some games in paper last night. Actually, was my first time getting some games in paper, and I was like, yeah, I just always forget how much I need to be playing games in paper for like repetitions, specific like card interactions and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited to play in person. I do really think that is something that is you can't place enough value on when it comes to getting to an event just before it starts and actually having time, like the week of or something. If you're flying on the weekend before or the Monday and you get 2 or 3 days in a house or a apartment or whatever it is with a bunch of players or hotel, wherever it is. Hotel lobbies is always very popular, and getting a bunch of games in is just, you definitely can't emphasize just how important it is, I think, to get in physical reps with your deck.
For sure, and I feel like especially so for like the heroes in like the past 2 sets, I do feel like there's a lot of not like fiddliness, but there's just a lot of like board state / card management that you need to be aware of. Like Gravy Bones, for example, right? There's the whole muscle memory of flipping your allies face down, the ones that go from the arena, and maybe having a little separate pile in a graveyard for your face up, watery grave cards there. The whole gold stuff, right? And like tapping your hero, especially tapping your compass, untapping all these things. And then before that in Hunted, we had Arakni Marinette, who I feel like is similarly in that boat as well. Remembering to mark your opponent, remembering to take off the mark from your opponent, remembering to roll the die to flip, and playing cards like Codex of Frailty, which are like 6 actions on one card, right? You grab your card from your graveyard, tell your opponent to grab theirs, make them discard, give them the tokens, all that kind of stuff. So, paper reps, very, very invaluable. And also, it's just way more fun.
That's true.
I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, mechanical things are very important, certainly. For me, this week in Flesh and Blood has been trying to play as much as I can. It's been very difficult, unfortunately, just other things going on. But trying to play as much as possible and trying to decide what on earth I'm going to play in Classic Constructed, Pankaj, has been challenging. We're going to talk about this format. We're going to recap Nationals this week on the pod, talk a little bit about some changes, some living legend or some not living legends. I don't know, the roulette of living legend continues even this weekend because there is a battle hardened this weekend, right? So in theory, we could have another hero living legend before we get to Pro Tour, which is hilarious. So yeah, that's kind of been my week, trying to decide what deck to play. I've played so many things at this point, honestly. I think in the past week and a half, trying to like really solidify and narrow, like choose the deck I'm going to play, I think that I have played with a decent like handful of reps, 6 or 7 heroes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the meta does definitely seem to be very, very wide, and the national results show that. But also, I'm sure what's making the decision tough for you is that the love of your life did just LL in a very unexpected turn of events. Yeah, Dash IE has gone, which is, I know it was your prime pick for Singapore, so sorry about that. You're gonna need to find something else.
Yeah, definitely my prime pick. And otherwise, yeah, I've just been trying to get some drafts in as well. This weekend is definitely focused for me on getting some more drafts in, and then hopefully I can get a couple in when I arrive in Singapore on the Thursday. That is kind of the plan. But I leave, Wednesday night, so I've still got a few more days. Got the weekend, which will be good, and then I'll be in Singapore, ready to play the Pro Tour, which I haven't played a Pro Tour in, I guess, over a year. I mean, I played Worlds, I guess, right? But I didn't play Amsterdam last year, so PTLA was the last Pro Tour I played. But of course, I played Worlds in Osaka.
Right. I forgot you didn't play Amsterdam, but yeah, I mean, Worlds is basically
of course it is.
just a bigger Pro Tour.
Exactly,
right?
Same thing.
So, on to the news then. The last weekend of Nationals has concluded, bringing us to the end of National season. More of that on the main topic and like the whole results, both the last week of results and also overall result throughout the entire season. Dash Inventor Extraordinaire has living legended in... I don't think anyone predicted this, but yep, she's out of here. And Azalea is one single living legend point away.
Yeah, I know. I don't believe it, honestly. It's so insane. Like, we've got the same treatment again with Azalea as we have with Briar before it and things like that.
And Prism. Yeah. Aside from that, also the Ira Armory deck, we now know the contents, and I know some people are already brewing with. Some people are calling it a Katsu Armory deck and are trying to trying to use those cards in Katsu to varying degrees of success. So that's the other thing in the news. And yeah, to your point, we do have one more Battle Hardened coming up this weekend. Battle Hardened Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
So Azalea might LL then. But yeah.
Did you consider popping over to KL? I mean, that's a very short. It's like 2 hours away from you by plane, I think, from memory.
Yeah, I did consider actually, but just timeline wise, it's kind of like the only weekend I have to actually like spend time with like my family and stuff.
Yeah, fair.
Because the weekend after this is the Pro Tour, and then the weekend after that I fly back already. So it's kind of like there's one weekend, and like my brother is like super busy. It's very work wise, is super busy. So I do like the weekend's kind of the only time I get to actually spend quality time with him.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
I'm here for that.
I'm sure many people are on the way in. Your road warriors, your world tour points chasers will be into Kuala Lumpur before heading in to Singapore, no doubt. So I think, these Battle Hardens the week before a Pro Tour, a World Championship, whatever it might be, always very good to keep a close eye on because some of the best players in the world are there. And I think people do sometimes pull their punches a little bit, but I think because we're getting into this world now where it's just so competitive, there's just so many players, good players, I think people just say like, well, the decks are kind of there. Like everyone kind of knows. Like me releasing which deck I'm going to play effectively before I get to the event is going to have such minimal impact. So I should just play the best deck and get reps on it, get experience and try and win this Battle Harden. So honestly, I think what the meta looks like this weekend will be a very good indicator of Pro Tour Singapore, and as well, we will talk more about the expected meta, I think, and also we'll do a bit of a preview pod next week before we get to Singapore.
Yeah, and that'll be in person, yeah? Like the...
Well, printed to, maybe if we can find a time on Thursday, otherwise we might do some, maybe we do half and half. Maybe we'll talk about it after the pod. We'll work it out, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll figure that out for sure.
I guess that's it from the news, right? This Azalea being 1 point away, like the fact that it can living legend this weekend, I think it's unlikely, right? I don't think Azalea needs to have much of an impact on this format so far, or a couple of national.
Yeah, and also similar spot where even if she does LL, how much does that actually change, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people are actually like checking for that hero.
This is even less impactful than Zen, if you can believe it, when we came to Osaka, I think.
Which is wild, especially if you think about how Cindra is like a very, very like prominent player in this format. You would think Azalea would be like one of the counters for it, but nah, it's like Slippy is in that spot, right? So yeah, it's wild to think that Azalea wouldn't have too much like despite one of the top decks being a very red line aggro deck.
Yeah. Right. Let's get into the Commander Cookout for this week. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, you can do so. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. If you're a YouTube watcher, you can send us an email, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. If you're an Arsenal Pass patron, you can drop it in the Arsenal Pass Discord, or like Alex has done our question this week, you can drop it in our Spotify comments. I thought we'd finally go to our Spotify comments and grab a question here. And this question comes from, it was dropped on episode 218, so a couple of weeks ago. Alex asks, which hero or class do you think teaches the greatest holistic understanding of flesh and blood? While a hero like Kano is complex, so much of it seems independent of what the opponent is doing outside of how much arcane barrier or spell void they have. Related to this, is there a hero class that you think offers the greatest amount of player agency in how they play the game, or even a single hand? I think there's two questions, so why don't we tackle the first question of which hero or class do you think teaches the greatest holistic understanding of flesh and blood, if there is indeed one of those that exists, Pankaj?
Holistic is a very... I don't know. I don't really fully understand what the term holistic means in this.
Maybe it touches on the most elements of core flesh and blood.
Yeah, so I guess where does something like arcane damage? So I guess my first thought is if you think about something like a Runeblade or like a Verdance, who are doing split damage, is that in a sense inherently more holistic because they also interact with arcane damage as well as other fundamentals of flesh and blood because they are also doing physical damage on top of it? So that's kind of where my mind went to first when I see this term holistic. Because both those classes, yeah, they kind of attack on two different axes or two different damage types already. And aren't so far into like the Kano realm or like the pure wizard realm where you're only doing like one type of it.
Yeah, I think for me, maybe Verdance has some specificity that I might think would confuse players trying to get a holistic view of the game, because there's some things that I think are a bit counterintuitive, especially around decompose. But
and Striders, I guess, is kind of it's a very like a unique. There's
nothing really out of the game, is there? Yeah, I actually think there's a real reason that LSS chose to use Aurora as, you know, a marquee of the format that they wanted to, or marquee of the game, sorry, that they wanted to beyond just 12 months time, but it ended up lasting 12 months time or even less. It's a Runeblade, like you say. I do think Runeblade is that. It's physical damage, it's arcane damage. It plays fairly straightforward games, but can also defend. It sort of scales with your skill level in terms of the return you'll get out of it, but it still has an inherently strong base to it. It shows you elemental plus class. It also has like aura interaction as well. I think Aurora has probably been the kind of best example of that, honestly, and I think there's a reason why they chose to, you know, have that as that marquee hero for new players entering the game.
Yes. I think I'm struggling to come up with perhaps a better example than Aurora. I think I'm that.
I think if I was to point someone in a direction, if they were like, I'm starting to play Flesh and Blood today, right now, I think that's a more difficult question, because I think a lot of the heroes in the format right now in Classic Constructed are more in one wheelhouse, right? They're a bit more specific than maybe they have been in the past. I think people might point to Cindra, but Cindra is, I think, very specific in certain ways. I think, you know, if you're looking for an easier hero to pick up, maybe Cindra is a good example, but there's a lot of interplay with the daggers and how you return those and flick knives and things like that. It's not particularly... it doesn't translate well to other things necessarily. Like, you might play Cindra for a while, go and jump on another hero, you might not have learned a lot of fundamentals that you might need to in the game. So I think that's difficult. Honestly, I might actually, as much as we said, you know, Verdance and the decompose stuff can be a bit awkward, I do actually wonder if just Florian is where I would point people if they're looking for a holistic view of the game right now, entering into it.
Yeah, I would go towards either Verdance or Florian, I would say. Cindra feels just a little bit too linear.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like
specific.
Aurora had like this whole other...
It's quite specific.
Yeah. What makes it quite different from Aurora is that Aurora did have a whole different sort of... She had more of a setup that she could have access to depending on the matchup, whereas Cindra kind of just does the same thing, regardless of match. I think maybe puts her out of it. Like Kasai is, I think, perhaps in the conversation as well, because there is a level of changing your pace of play, your pace of the game plan you're trying to enact, depending on what the opponent's doing, which I think is pretty important. But I just feel like Verdance might actually just be the best example of that, which is funny to think about, because you wouldn't expect a wizard to be there, but she's almost a Runeblade. She's kind of basically a Runeblade.
Yeah.
She's not like a pure wizard in that sense.
Okay. Well, that's our answers. The second part of this question from Alex was, is there a hero or class that you think offers the greatest amount of player agency and how they play the game or even a single hand? Well, I think in some ways agency is kind of... We've had many debates on this. I think it's hard to pin down what good agency looks like if indeed that is a thing. What I would say is I would look to something that is to get agency, to have consistency, to be able to block, to attack, to use your hands in good ways, I think is what I would be looking at. So is there a hero class you think offers the greatest amount of player agency? I think they've all had their moments, honestly, depending on the power level of cards, the redundancy of cards available to them. I think Oldhim has always kind of been one of those heroes for me, honestly, because it felt like you could change your game plan. There was just so many different things you could do with it because of the power level, because of the ice, because of the interaction, because of the disruption, plus the power cards you had, plus Crown of Seeds, plus shield access. Oldhim kind of felt like you could almost do it all if you wanted to, or at least do some things at certain points.
The first thing that comes to mind, I think, is actually, again, like, I think it's Kasai. We're talking about sheer agency over here. I don't think the power level is, like, super, super high, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think she has a lot of hands where I'm kind of looking at my hand being like, okay, this card can convert for 3 on offense or 3 on defense.
Yeah.
And it is up to me, and, like, I can decide how the tempo of the game that I want to enact for the strategy that I'm going for overall. Which I do feel like that level of agency kind of the most in like the warrior class. It feels like, just because, to your point, there's a lot of redundancy in a lot of the cards. So I can literally be like, okay, this red hit and run is like, okay, it's an extra 3 damage on my turn. Or it's a 3 block, and I can totally choose. I can react to what my opponent's doing and decide based on that. So I do feel like warrior is probably in that realm. Except there's some matchups where you kind of just feel like you have 0 agency because they're sending arcane damage at you and you're like a warrior. So it's strange. It's like if you're in like a fair-ish game of Flesh and Blood, I do feel like warrior offers quite a bit of play agency.
I like
but, yeah.
I like that you separated power level from that, because it is two different things, right? I think that is really important to note, is that if you're looking for something that offers you a lot of options and ability to play almost every hand of the game, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to correlate to the power. I do think that the decks that allow you to do that the most, like to your point, sort of assess your hand, play different lines, play offensive, defensively, with your different pitch values, these sorts of things, I think is really closely tied to decks that have powerful blues. That's kind of why I think Oldhim was partly that, because it just had these really powerful blues. But I think there's other examples as well. I don't think it's just confined to that. I think Lexi had that as well, honestly. I think Lexi had a lot of that.
I think Dromai did, actually. Like, for quite a while in
Pre-time.
the game, I did think that Dromai was the most difficult hero to master.
Yeah.
In Flesh and Blood, simply because of the sheer amount of decisions you had to make. I mean, like, to your point, it's not because she had powerful blues, but because the deck was mono red and your resource cards are still red.
Yeah.
Like, this powerful resource base. And the whole other resource mechanic of Ash as well, right? Just something you had to manage.
Resource.
And then to some extent, the damage in your deck is in some sense like finite. It's weird. It's a board state deck, but there's a limited number of dragons you actually have in your 60 cards, right? And depending on the matchup, you actually have to care about when are you deploying your Chromai, when are you deploying your Mirror Guy, for example, right? Like against the Guardian matchups, you had to be very careful. Like, those were additional resources you had to actually note and keep track of. And the sheer variability and like the skill of a Dromai pilot, like I could tell when I'm sitting across a very experienced Dromai, like a top level Dromai, versus like someone who's just picking up the deck versus someone who's like a mid tier Dromai, because of just how much agency the Dromai had in the way they play the game in the hand. So if you're looking into Flesh and Blood's past, I think that's my answer for greatest amount of play agency, and everything blocked very well, right? Exactly. So she had that access to interact on as well.
I would agree with everything you just said prior to the printing of Tome of Imperial Flame.
Yeah.
After that, I think that changed everything, because I think you would sit down, someone's like, I just picked the stick up for the first time, and they're like, oh, here's Tome, here's like 5 Ash, I was just like, oh my goodness. But yes.
I knew you were going to bring that up. Every time we talk about Dromai, you have to complain about Tome of Imperial Flame.
Yes, I will. I will. I mean, it just
Yeah.
But I complain about it because I love that deck, and it just for all the reasons you just said, like all the decision trees, the complexity of it, the ability to navigate these game states, and all of a sudden you're like, no, this card is now I have to play this card because it's so powerful that if I don't play it, I'm giving up edge. But when I play it, sometimes my agency is just complete. I just I can't make these good decisions because I'm just reliant on what's on top of my deck. It's just like, or worse, like someone playing against you and being in the same situation. Anyway, Great question. Thank you for the question, Alex. If you want to get your questions in, as you say, please do so. Always on the lookout for more questions, and this time one from our Spotify comment section. So appreciate that. Let's get on to the main topic of the pod, Pankaj. And do you want to lead us in to what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so main topic is that the national season has concluded, and also Hayden Dale did not LL-IE. Bad. So week 3 of national results are in, so we're going to go over that first before we look at the overall national season results. And this past weekend, we had Arakni slip through the cracks with the most wins, which I believe the previous week he also had the most, well, they had the most wins tied with Gravy Bones. But now they are firmly at the top this past weekend with 4 wins total. Cindra is back up there, after having a very weak week 2 performance. She's up there with 3 wins this past weekend. And then after, we have Azalea and Acilio, both at 2 wins each. And then we have a whole bunch of 1 wins in the form of Dash.io, Dash.IE, which LL'd her, Florian, Kano, Kasai, Lavaya, Prism, Verdance, and Victor Goldmain. So things that stick out immediately. Slippy, once again, most wins. Cindra, back up there. And someone who's missing from this list entirely is Gravy Bones. Gravy did not pick up a single win this past weekend. 2 Azaleas, which is also interesting because I don't think she was really having a splash the previous few weeks, but now she's back up there. Florian showing up for the first time this entire national season. This past weekend was the first time Florian actually got a win.
This might be the week for Florian, if there was ever one.
Yep, and then there was a final Dash.IE win as well, which LL'd her. Victor also showed up for the first time this past weekend. Kasai won in your neck of the woods, Hayden. Kasai won in Australia. And then there were 2 wins for Acilio. So where do you want to start with this whole thing?
Well, I think the first thing I want to start is 13 heroes out of 21 nationals. That's a pretty amazing spread of heroes there. I think, I look at these top 5 heroes. These top 2 heroes, and I think we spoke about Slippy last week in terms of where that was positioned. We thought it would probably more or less maintain. Cindra had obviously had a tough week, so it's not surprising to see it come back at least a little bit. I think the biggest one is what you said, Gravy, and I think we've been speaking about Gravy every single week. And ultimately, it probably hasn't quite. I think you spoke about particularly like a kind of crescendoing in the lead up to Singapore and being this kind of piece of the format that was going to be defining. And I agreed with you, right? It would define how people would select and choose decks. But ultimately, it hasn't necessarily put up the results that we might have expected. So what are your thoughts there about Gravy not picking up any wins this week?
Well, I'd say it doesn't pick up the results this past weekend. Like this last weekend, there's obviously Gravy didn't win anything, but I think overall national season, his impact is definitely felt. I think will continue to be felt. I think what's happening right now is I think Gravy Bones have, not just Gravy, I guess. I think people have realized that the way Gravies were being built to combat the Cindras and Slippies actually made them more susceptible to fatigue. Which was, I don't know whether that was something you were experiencing at all, like testing and stuff, but we found that once they cut Humperdinks, like suddenly the slower decks some of them, could just say, all right, I'm just going to be super disciplined and clear your only 14 allies in your deck, which are all small allies too, and then you're out of damage.
Yep.
I think they basically are in the other end of the spectrum now, where at the beginning they were like, how do we deal with the decks that are just racing us down? And they're like, hey, let's put swells in, and then they could actually beat them. Now they're like, wait, we've gone too far. How do you actually have the game plan to beat fatigue? And I think what's going to happen, what needs to be investigated, is whether they could find the anti-fatigue plan within the shell that also gives them the aggro game plan. We saw this happen at Dromai, right? Where it's like, okay, eventually she was just like, okay, if you pitch stack, Guy Chromai, stuff like that, you actually can just beat fatigue. It's fine. And the question is, can Gravy do that? I don't know if it is. But yeah, it's a board state deck. We've seen this before. It definitely could happen where if they're like maybe super disciplined with the way they deploy their chums and their sawbones in the end game, and just play for that, and then maybe have an unbeatable board state with a combination of those cards, which they also want into aggro. Maybe they find one Humperdinck in there as like a super failsafe, backed up by a chum or something. Maybe something can happen. But I'm not. I haven't. How to say it? I'm not writing Gravy off for Singapore. If that was a question.
I'm just, yeah, I guess just curious because I think we sat on two different sides, not massively apart, but on different sides of the fence. Where I think, correct me if I'm misinterpreting your words or speaking differently, but you felt that Gravy was the most powerful hero in this format and was going to kind of define the format and probably have potentially have the most wins, either be a national season or by the time we get to Singapore, right? Be sort of the most impactful deck. My view was that Gravy is defining of the meta and is powerful, but has a lot of different angles to attack. It has softness that other heroes that have maybe been a bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Heroes that have been oppressive potentially in the past haven't had those ways to attack them. And I think I still stand by that. I think Gravy has not particularly impressed me, I think. And part of it is builds, right? Like you say, I still think there's a lot of things to work out with the right builds for Gravy. And the meta is really wide. So Gravy has a lot of things coming its way to deal with. So it's really hard when you have cards that don't block or you have fatigue on your potential mind and all these different things that Gravy has to deal with. So yeah, but ultimately I think, and we'll go to the total results, it's in the top 5 decks, but it's not in the top 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm with you that he's warping, but not necessarily the most powerful, which is honestly a breath of fresh air. I was worried he would just be oppressive, but yeah, it's hard to argue with the results. It doesn't seem like he's oppressive. It seems like he has a presence. You have to think about him as you build. But at least right now, he doesn't seem to be,
broken,
restrictive, like too restrictive. And at least for now, we'll see. Some of the best players are showing up in Singapore on Gravy,
things
so
can
we
happen.
have to see whether maybe they cracked it.
If it doesn't win Singapore, will you issue a formal apology to Brian Gottlieb? Though that's what I want to know.
If it doesn't win Singapore, I mean, winning's different, right? Like, let's talk about top 8s.
Okay, if it doesn't warp the meta at Singapore, will you issue a formal apology?
Yes, I would. But also, I feel like it's already warping, so I feel like I'm pretty safe.
We'll talk about that. We'll get to final weeks and some predictions. The other thing that stands out to me, I think, is just the fact that this is just such an aggressively leaning into national season. I think usually we find that by the time we get to the end of a season, that you start to see some solidification of these more mid-rangey or defensive decks because the meta starts to firm up, so you can start to find your angle into it. I think this is where we've typically seen, decks like Florian and the last ProQuest season, where we've seen some Guardians and Road to National seasons, where we've seen, some of these Enigmas, for instance, some of these things sort of start to take up more meta share. It just hasn't happened this time. It's been, 7 of the 21, a full third of the wins last week came from 2 very aggressive heroes, right? And then look at the next 2 after that. 2 wins each for 2 more aggressive heroes. So, and go down after that into the ones, a lot of aggressive heroes in there. Just the one Victor win from a Guardian standpoint. There's a Kasai in there, but it was a fairly aggressively leaning Kasai deck. So just quite interesting to me, I think that. And I think the reason that is because if you want to play a more defensive orientated deck, there's no one defensive deck that's good against all the aggressive decks. It just doesn't exist because of the different ways that the aggressive decks attack this meta.
I actually do think there is, which is really fun. I'm looking at this week 3 pie chart.
Is it Yao?
You have Cindra Crack, Cindra, Azalea, Acilio, and I'm like, how is Victor? Like, Victor has 1 win, but I'm like, looking at his field, I'm just like, doesn't Victor just eat 4 of these decks? Like, Flippy, Cindra, Azalea, Acilio, all kind of just crumble to a Victor. So I'm kind of like, where is this hero? And just once again, Guardian, man, Guardian's just bad, it seems like, because even in a field like this where it feels like he should be feasting on these heroes, he's just still just unable to perform. It seems like I'd lean more towards Victor over Jarl. I just do think he's like the stronger guardian.
Oh, interesting.
Somehow, which is weird to say. It's weird to say given the other one has like a talent and has stalagmite. Yeah, Victor has just seemed more impressive and more consistent, if you will. But yeah, just looking at this like top half of the pie chart for week 3, I'm like, where are the Victors? And still unable to perform. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I'm saying. There's just not. So I actually think Victor doesn't have a great matchup to Cindra, which is might sound weird, but I think it's true from the small parts I've seen. So I'm actually not surprised that. But even if it did have a good matchup to Cindra, you're like, okay, you have a good matchup into the two aggressive decks. But what about your Gravy matchup? What about your Verdance matchup? Like what about your Prism? Your Prism matchup is pretty fine actually. Your Gravy and your Verdance matchup, I guess. But that's still something you've got to worry about, right? And I don't think your Cindra matchup is that great. So whereas there's other decks that have a good Cindra matchup, maybe, for instance, like Jarl, but your Slippy matchup is maybe not particularly great. So it feels to me like you kind of one or the other, and yeah, that's not a good place to be, especially when you're also not good against Verdance and you're also not very good against Gravy.
Yeah, so actually, let's go ahead and look at the overall national season results over all 3 weeks, because I do want to talk about Verdance and Gravy a little bit, and it makes more sense to talk about in context of the entire national season. So overall, we have Cindra and Slippy tied for the most wins at 8 each, which is a lot. So it's like 16 wins across all national seasons went to 2 of the most aggressive decks in this format, in the form of Cindra and Slippy. And then after that, we have 3 heroes tied for the next highest wins, and these are only 4 wins each, so it's quite a big of a steep drop-off. And that's Gravy Bones, Prism, and Verdance, all sharing the 4 wins each across national season. After we have a couple of 3 wins, which is like Azalea and Dash.io, and then 2 wins with Arakni, Marinette, Kano, and Acilio. So Verdance and Gravy, who are both in the 4-win sort of bracket, we brought them up just now. Where do you think... Okay, I think we spoke about Gravy and we both are sort of aligned, where he's warping, but he doesn't seem to be oppressively powerful. Yep. Where do you think Verdance lies, like right now, with the in the context of the rest of this, where Cindra is popular and is pretty fine to Verdance, and Gravy is still like warping and is good into Verdance. So like, where do you think she lies? Because if we think that she is falling off, then coming back to like that Victor discussion, doesn't really matter that he has a bad Verdance matchup when he's beating up the top half of like all the aggressive decks.
So I think there's 4 decks in this top 5 that have been the top 4 decks for the entire season. In my personal opinion, I think we called 4 of these decks heading into week 1, which was Cindra, Gravy, Prism, and Verdance. Arakni Slips Through the Cracks has been more of the surprise, I would say. We spoke about, what's that 5th deck going to be? Ultimately, it was Arakni, and Arakni shot to equal top wins with Cindra. But I think these 5 decks that have taken the most win share, 4, 4, 4, 8, 8, respectively, are the 5 best decks in this meta right now. Because you look at the 3s after that, Dash.io, Azalea, Marinette, Kano, Acilio. I think these heroes are all fine, but they are a tier below the next lot, although there's a couple of meta angles potentially which we can talk about with these heroes. I think when it comes to Verdance specifically, I thought it was the best deck going into week 1 of Nationals. I thought when we spoke in week 2, I was like, I think, people are going to respond to this, obviously. It's going to start to drop away. We're going to see more. I think we're talking about Cindra. I think we're talking about how the Gravy Bones adapted. But we spoke specifically about things like Prism as well, potentially being on the rise in week 2. I think where Verdance is now, though, is in a very interesting spot heading to Singapore. I think people are going to play Verdance because I think people are seeing the drop-off of Gravy. I think people are going to think, wow, maybe Gravy drops off. And actually what people play is a lot more Slip Through the Cracks. And Verdance has a very good Slip Through the Cracks matchup. It's Cindra matchup, it's Prism matchup, not particularly great. But if you think that Gravy is being replaced, or you can find an angle into one of those heroes, so maybe you found something to beat, for instance, Gravy, you've got a good plan into Gravy, then I think people will consider playing Verdance, I think. But I think for me, it's probably the 4th or 5th of those decks in terms of options for PT.
Yeah, because if you look at these top 5 decks, Cindra, Slippy, Gravy, Prism, Verdance, I'm just feeling like Verdance has
looks like the weak link
worst
out, right?
matchup spread within this 5 I don't know, like 5-pointed star or something. It feels like Verdance has like the weakest matchup spread, right? You know, Cindra, Gravy, Prism are all decks you don't really want to face.
Yeah.
And then there's Slippy, where you're like, you are the one in this list that is best into Slippy.
Yes.
I would say you're better into Slippy than Prism is.
I agree.
So, like that's like your shining, like that's your the thing you have on your resume, so to speak. Was like, I'm good into like Slippy, and none of the other 3 decks are actually decent to Slippy. So it feels like that's the thing holding her up, and the reason why she's still able to perform. But I think the narrative is shifting, especially with the past 2 weekends of Slippy dominance. The narrative is shifting towards Slippy becoming potentially the big bad of this format. Like, we spoke about the Ferris wheel, right? It feels like Gravy was at the top of the Ferris wheel for like the first like 3 weeks. And now Slippy is maybe taking over Gravy's spot in the Ferris wheel. And if you see that, you know, maybe it's sort of being like, Verdance starting to look quite appealing again.
I'm not sure Gravy was maybe week 2 was at the top of the Ferris, so I don't think it was week 1, and it definitely wasn't last week. I think it's been... Gravy's the guy that's kind of like trying to climb up the Ferris wheel. You know, he's like, people are always like, I gotta watch out for that guy. But I don't think he's necessarily been king at the top.
I guess what I meant was he had the biggest target on his back, it felt like.
Yeah,
it felt like
yeah.
everyone was like, concerned about a Gravy matchup. People were playing decks with the expectation they're going to play against a lot of Gravies.
Yes.
I'll put it that way. He's
Sure.
the biggest target on his back. Whereas now it feels like it's potentially shifting towards Slippy, which...
Or Cindra.
Yeah, like maybe Verdance's stonks go up because of that.
Yeah, but I mean, Cindra's still there, right? Cindra has had a great season overall. I mean, I think we spoke... I was very down on Cindra heading out of the ProQuest season, and that big part of that was the fact that I just didn't think it was good. Like, it wasn't good into those current Florian builds when they had Scepter and Germinate. I don't think was particularly great against Prism. I think it's I think it's fine, but it was also was still around right at the time, and people were building in particular ways where it wasn't necessarily good for you. So I don't know, Cindra didn't particularly strike me, but then we came into the first week and we spoke about Cindra being a response to Gravy, right? And if you're going to play Cindra, now's the time to play Cindra, and ultimately it's held the test through the whole season. And I think when you look at this top 5 decks, Verdance, Prism, Gravy, Arakni, Cindra has a pretty good matchup spread. So I don't know. I'm not sure it's just all one-way traffic for Slippy being kind of king of the format, so to speak.
So actually, I do want to pick your brain about Cindra a little bit. As someone who wasn't high on Cindra, there was I don't know whether you watched this week's World Tour Weekly, but Margin brought up on that he doesn't see why you'd pick Cindra over Slippy, and I feel like I'm quite inclined to agree, because they're both sort of doing that aggressive thing, but one is doing it with disruption and one is better into the other by a mile, right? Like, if you're playing a Slippy versus Cindra matchup, you'd much rather be on the Slippy side.
I don't agree.
So,
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I don't.
Okay, yes. So I'm glad. So that's why I wanted to pick your brain. Like, what's your thoughts on picking Cindra over Slippy? Like, Verdance matchup, I think that's
100%.
Fine.
Yeah, I think if we go through the other top 5 decks, I think the Verdance matchup, I think, is definitely better for Cindra. The Gravy matchup is definitely better for Cindra. The Prism matchup, I think, goes Slippy's way. I think that's better for Slippy. I think then the Cindra versus Slippy matchup, I think it is Slippy favored, but I don't think it's massively Slippy favored, honestly. So I think it's really close. Honestly, this format, I think particularly these 5 decks, because honestly, I think we can talk about it, but I don't think there's a lot of things you can pick outside of these 5 decks because they just don't have a good enough matchup spread. Unless you call the meta or you sort of play gem roulette with something specifically. I think your format is kind of like, right, which of the 2 aggressive decks do you play, Cindra or Arakni, based on whether you think there's going to be more Gravy, more Prism, or more Verdance as potentially the 3rd most played deck. And also, do you have something for the mirror that you feel? Because you've got to factor in the mirror when these 2 decks are so heavily played, right? You're going to play the mirror. So how do you actually feel sitting down against the mirror, like sitting across the mirror? If you can make that feel like it's a kind of 60% matchup, then all of a sudden you're like, right, my matchup spread is looking really good here, picking one of these 2 decks. But yeah, that's kind of my view on Cindra. I think it's really close. I honestly think it's actually pretty close as to why people would choose to play Slippy or Cindra, which I would have not... I mean, I definitely didn't think I was going to be having this conversation 3 weeks ago, I'll tell you what.
I'd like to set a stage for what potentially a gem roulette sort of deck might be, because I do think there's a gradient of like the most gem roulette deck, and after it coming, there's meta decks, these 5 we've spoken about. There's gem roulette deck, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. And I think perhaps the most general deck for at least these 5 top heroes, I think, is actually Victor. Where you play against Cindra, Slippy, or Prism, and you are really happy. Where you play against Gravy Bones or Verdance, and you almost might as well just go eat lunch. For them. Unless they found something for Gravy, they might have found something for Verdance. I don't think they can or will find something for Verdance. But maybe they found something for Gravy. But he seems quite generality on that front.
Yeah, I think it. I think you're right. My only one thing is I'm not actually sure the Syndrome matchup is that amazing. And honestly, actually, is the Slippy matchup actually that good as well? Like, if you don't get to play many defense reactions, right?
From what I've been hearing about like our internal players, like people are thinking of bringing Slippy. They're like, yeah, if they sit across a Guardian, like a Victor, that's
pretty bad.
Probably one of the. It's like one of the worst matchups. It's okay. It's not quite a eat lunch matchup, but it's definitely not something they want to see.
Yeah, because I know I've been testing a bit of Jarl, and I don't think it's good into Slippy, particularly, which I was quite surprised about actually. So I wasn't sure if it might be similar for Victor, but I guess Victor has it doesn't have to play as many of these kind of like bad ice cards and stuff that aren't relevant a lot of the time. He just gets to play kind of like gas, and also has visit the Goldman Estate to set up like big turns as well, right? If you give them space to do so, it just has so much value. Of course, clash cards as well. So yeah, it makes sense.
Exactly. Cast homes.
Nope. No
the next hero on that gradient of Gem Roulette, who I think is less Gem Roulette than Victor, but I do want to revisit Florian, who did pick up one win this past weekend. And it's also someone you brought up last week, I believe.
Yeah.
Theoretically, decent Syndra, Slippy, like not as good as Victor, I think, but you're still fine to Syndra, Slippy, and Verdance, and Prism. And then again, not as bad as Victor into like Verdance and Gravy. So it feels like a bit more of a you take Victor's matchup spread and you sort of squish it towards the middle a little bit, and that's kind of where I see Florian sitting. And he did pick up a win this past weekend, and you have the most Florian experience here. So why don't you tell us where you think this?
I've played quite a bit of Florian. I was really hoping I'd be able to play Florian for this PT. I think its raw power as an Earth deck is. I think in theory, to me, it's like the two Earth decks should just always be good, right? Because they just have this raw power. They have some of the best cards in the format. They have late game inevitability in different ways. One has a combo, and one has just value with grasp, right, and hero ability. Unfortunately, what I found is that your Syndra matchup is not good. So I basically think that makes Florian unplayable because your Gravy Bone matchup is not good and your Verdance matchup is not good. So your good matchups are Prism and Arakni of those top 5. So I think that for me, this is the kind of thing. Like, this is what I'm saying about these decks that aren't this top 5. You're looking for a spread. Like, you're looking for a hero with a good spread to play into these top 5. And basically, no other deck outside of the top 5 is good into 3 of these decks, which is crazy, right? And you cited Victor before, where it's like, okay, Syndra and Arakni, right, but then Gravy
and Prism.
And Prism, right, but I'm actually not sure the Syndra matchup is that good. So maybe Victor is the best of these kind of heroes on the outside looking in with a meta spread, but yeah, it's not Florian, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Shift focus a little bit because we did get some new cards, and we did speak about this a couple of weeks ago, where this was something people had an eye on for sure in preparation for the PT, and that's the Ira Armory deck, right? It's interesting because the whole Armory deck focuses obviously on the Edge of Autumn stuff, which is a significant shift for both Ira and Katsu if Katsu choose to go that way. To the point where I don't know if there's just enough time to brew and like dedicate yourself to that because you're taking a big risk.
Yeah.
That much time in it, and like it doesn't turn out to be good enough. But do you think there's a world where that sort of Ira Katsu? I think Katsu just seems a little bit more strong, especially if you're looking like eat up like a Syndra. I feel like I'd rather be on the Katsu to really punish Syndra's inability to block. You think there's a world where he can maybe have a build like theoretically going to Syndra, theoretically going to Gravy, right? So the question is, can you find one more good matchup between Prism, Verdance, and Slip the Request?
I think Ira actually is a good Prism matchup from experience. Not massively amazing, but I think it's favored to Ira, especially with a couple of really key poppers. So I actually think if you look at it and you go, right, good Prism matchup, good Gravy matchup, I think you're actually looking for the third deck because I guess it's Syndra, right? I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure if actually that is true or not. I actually haven't played the matchup, but if that is true, then yeah, there's an angle, right? Especially if
And
you
like
have a plan to
flick flacks and snags.
Yeah.
Or slippy. I don't know.
Like they genuinely could be. Can you beat anything else? I don't know. Like,
yeah, actually, you bring up a great point there. For of these top 5 decks that we've established that we are predicting, what sort of meta representation do you expect the combination of these 5 decks to have at the
yeah,
Pro
I'll
Tour?
answer in one second. One thing I want to say just on that Ira question. I've gone through this question so many times in my head with different heroes, and it's like, oh, okay, on paper, I have this spread, and then you play some games, and then you're like, okay, so this matchup that I thought was a good matchup is actually only like 55 to 60, and then this matchup that I thought was like a 55 to 60 matchup is actually like a 45 to 50 matchup, and all of a sudden you're like, actually this hero isn't fundamentally powerful enough. These other heroes they have more consistency, they're able to attack me or win games that I feel like they shouldn't be able to win because they're just a better hero than the one I'm trying to play. It's something that I've time and time again come across trying to prepare for this event. And what is interesting is that there is, even though that has happened to me 5-6 times while prepping for this event, there's still 5 top heroes minimum, and that's quite interesting. I think it's an amazing standpoint we are in this game right now with the width of these heroes in this format. In terms of your question about what was your question again? Sorry.
I'll get back to that because I do have a response to what
go.
you said. I think the consistency piece of what you said is, I think, what it kind of boils down to. Like, internally, we have been trying the new Katsu stuff, the new Ira stuff, and it just comes down to, yeah, exactly what you said. It's like the Katsu, like, yeah, it has some turns where, like, wait, this feels illegal. But then there's also so many games where it's like you're ahead on tempo, and then you just draw your no starter hand, and your Edge of Autumn has been like banished already, and you're kind of just like, damn, I just lost this game like on the spot, even though I was like so far ahead. Yeah, boils down to the consistency thing and the raw power level.
Yeah, I have this. Sorry, one thing. I had this thing. I wrote some notes after you sent this to me, and I said, "This is my note. The meta boils down to one issue right now: decks that can't play 4 to 5 card hands consistently, you put in brackets, get punished, and inconsistency is the killer." And it is so true. Like that is just how I'm seeing this format right now. Is that I think you can play So you talked about gem roulette. You can play deck roulette, right? And this has been around for forever. You could play Leviathan, for instance, if you wanted to. You can play the roulette of Leviathan. But the problem is that people who understand that these decks have this inconsistency issue, they will block you. They will run you into these turns specifically. These good players, the best players in the world, will run you into these turns. And that is so. This deck that you take along to your armory, or you play on Talishar, or maybe you play against a couple of people who are a little bit inexperienced versus that deck, and you're like, wow, this feels insane. And then all of a sudden you're like, you play with your playtest partner or something, and they play against it 4 or 5 times, and they're like, at least a half decent player to a very good player. They're like, oh, hold up, what if I just do this? And then you're like, wow, how did this matchup go from feeling unlosable to feeling like a bad matchup in the space of 2 games? It's kind of insane how much that has been happening to me in this format, honestly.
That's a fantastic point, I think. The reminder that you are playing against the best players at the Pro Tour, the players who have done this experimentation like you have as well, that you and your playtest group have, and have found out that, yeah, if you just actually just fold your hand a couple of times into the Katsu to keep your life total high, eventually the Katsu will just draw that brick. Or even that Ira, which seems like she should be very consistent, but sometimes she's just going to draw a hand which she can actually only convert 2 cards, right? She's like holding a flick flack and like 2 random blues and like 1 2 for 6, and kind of just like, okay, this hand just does Kodachi, like Edge of Autumn 2 for 6, and that's all it does. And you just fold your hand a few too many times, and exactly what you said, they'll run you into these turns because they are the best players and they have practiced these same things. Everyone has been looking for the unique angle into the format. If you bring something like this that they've definitely tested, there's a reason they didn't bring that, right? It's because they know how to beat it.
These 5 heroes just have so much. Sorry, I know you want to ask this question. The 5 heroes just do have so much consistency. Like, I'll just go top to bottom to top. Verdance, Earth hero that can defend so well, and then has this combo inevitability, can turn most of its hands into damage with the way they're built these days. Has decompose, has all this kind of thing. It's maybe potentially sometimes the most awkward of these ones, but then you go up. Prism is just like, okay, like it's awkward hands are so few and far between, and usually it's on the defensive end, not the offensive hand, right? So using your hands are usually pretty fine. Gravy Bones actually is fairly consistent. You can build it to be fairly consistent, right? It's more about the way that you get attacked, but its offensive is pretty consistent. Arachne is actually very consistent, honestly, with some of these newer builds as well, where it's like, oh, maybe I am playing defense reactions, but I can actually use them to like pitch for something or sit in an arsenal because the opponent does have to attack me to put pressure on. Cindra, all red line, very hard to have these bad brick hands. It has a lot more starters and consistent starters in these builds now as well. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I just wanted to make that point because I think it is kind of the cornerstone of this format, honestly.
Agreed. So the question was, what meta representation do you expect from these top 5 heroes, like combined? How much of the meta do you think these top 5 heroes will be at?
That's Singapore? A great question. That's not the question I thought you were going to ask. I thought you were going to be like of each of them individually, and I was like, oh, can we do that next week when I've had a bit more thought?
Yeah, no, that's like a little too tough and a little too specific and granular. And I'm talking overall.
Okay.
Top 5 heroes, like because like the thing is. Why I came to this question was because what you brought up earlier when we were talking about like the IRA and stuff, where like, okay, maybe you're like 55 into three of the top 5 decks, whatever. But are you beating anything else? Was the question. And so for that part of it, are you beating anything else outside the top 5? I think it's important to consider how much do we expect the outside the top 5 to be, and I actually think it's kind of higher than usual because of just how wide open this meta is, right? So which is why that's a very relevant point. You can be like, oh, IRA, I'm decent at like maybe 3, maybe even 4. Of the 5 decks, but if you lose like literally like everything else, like the Acilio shows up and you like can't beat the Acilio, or that Victor shows up and you can't beat the Victor, and it kind of like potentially not the best way, because that aspect of it, the how good are you into stuff that's off meta in a sense, is perhaps more relevant this Pro Tour than has been in previous Pro Tours, because
people are just going to bring random stuff to try and gem roulette or be like, I can't find this angle, I'm going to play this hero sort of thing. I agree. I think this is going to be potentially the most flat hero spread we've had at a Pro Tour, which is crazy, right?
Exactly. It's quite different from just the last Pro Tour we had this year, where Aurora was just like the deck to bring, and then Enigma's the other deck to bring, and then everything else should just like not exist.
Yeah, I was actually looking. So I have an answer for you, but I was actually just going back to Pro Tour London to look at the meta, like what the top 5 heroes were as representation, because we had 560 players, was it for London?
Yes.
And luckily I have a calculator right here next to me, so I can do this. So Aurora's 162. So I'll tell you my answer before I do this. I think it's 2/3. I think those top 5 heroes are 2/3. Let's just see what these were at London. So it was 363, 560. It was 2/3. Exactly 2/3.
My guess is 50%. I think his top 5 heroes will be 50% of Singapore.
Yeah,
I think the meta is a little bit wider. Everything else is a little bit wider, and there's more reasons to bring this other stuff.
I think there's more reason to bring. So where London, I think you had to have. I remember on the pod where I was like, we both said this thing. Yeah, you have to have a very, very good reason to not play Enigma or Aurora at this event. That's not the case. I think instead you have to have a very good reason to not play one of these top 5 decks at this event. So I think the meta will be flatter, but not necessarily outside of the top 5, but within the top 5 is probably more of my prediction. So I think I'm probably a little bit high at 2/3. I think you're maybe a little bit low at 50%. So I'm thinking actually maybe more around the 60% mark, but a flatter spread between the top 5 as opposed to London, of course, where it was it was insane. I mean, the top 2 decks were a third of the meta. The other 3 after that were actually fairly flat, relatively speaking.
So I want to come back to the statement you made earlier about decks that can't play 4 or 5 card hands right now feel on the weaker end and inconsistencies. Because you also have a comment here that says you feel like Azalea should be better than it seems to have been performing. Yes. And I think Azalea is one of those decks where she does have some inconsistency, but by and large she can convert 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Aggressive. So, any theories on perhaps why Azalea isn't as strong as it should be? I do think, like, if I just look at these decks, it feels like Azalea and this top decks. I think the only deck you're super happy to play against is Cindra, right? Like Slippy can mess you up. like really badly. Prism is like it feels like a bit like coin flippy. Gravy, it's like if your go against stuff doesn't line up with like when they set up the allies. Also like stuff like rigor mortis, you just have no efficient way to clear rigor mortis, right? So that's like terrible. And then Verdance also feels kind of coin flippy. So it's strange. It feels like the paradigm that we were talking about, like 4 or 5 flat hands and consistency. It feels like Azalea is not that. She's consistent and can be aggressive, but just the way the top 5 decks have shaken out, it feels like it's just not her.
Yeah, I think it's just meta, honestly. Like, to answer your question, you kind of just answered it for me. Like, I think when we look back to week 1 of Nationals and we go back to the podcast that we recorded and we were speaking about the top 5 decks, like, we've been talking about top 5 decks this entire season. Like, what do they look like? And we said Azalea is maybe the 5th. We kind of spoke about a couple of options on the outside looking in. Is it Azalea on the outside looking in? You know, who's on the outside looking in, sort of thing. And Azalea, what we said, was kind of floating around that 5th spot. I think it does have the consistency. I think it does have the power. The problem is that just unfortunately, it just doesn't, like, it's probably maybe the 6th deck or the secret 6th deck, except that it just doesn't line up well into a lot of these heroes. And it, you know, to the point of even Cindra, right? It's like, well, does Cindra just do the thing where it does just like throw its hand at you a lot, and if you don't see enough disruption, they can on certain turns outmatch your damage, you know, and even all of a sudden it's like that's not a auto win matchup. It's like favored for sure, but you know, that's just one matchup, and then to your point, you've got Slippy, Gravy Bones, Prism, Verdance to worry about. So yeah, I think it's just meta considerations right now as to why Azalea hasn't cracked it.
Speaking of other decks that are outside looking in, I think the Warrior coping time is just kind of okay. So it's just kind of over, right? So here's the thing: I have been feeling very strongly that Warriors are just unplayable, and like the initial cope that they could actually play into Gravy was that it was just cope until the Gravies had to get better, and they did. The only thing holding me back, the only thing that's giving me a sliver of doubt, is Pablo Pintor played Kasai at Spanish Nationals. I think he was first seed going to top 8, and he got a Ciliud, I believe, in the quarterfinals. But I mean, first seed Kasai, and when a player like Pablo Pintor picks up Kasai, you have to at least consider that maybe this hero is more real than my mortal brain can fathom, right? So that's the only thing where I'm like, maybe it's not cope, because, you know, Pablo's playing it. I don't know if he's playing it at Singapore, but like, he played it for his nationals.
Yeah.
That's the only thing holding me back. What
I mean, Aaron Chance.
I think specifically Kasai. It's kind of like the only.
Oh, so I'll get to that in a second. But Aaron Chance also top 8'd Canadian Nationals with Kasai, right? So a couple of
also first seed.
Yeah, a couple of the best players in the world.
Those regions, and those are strong regions too.
Exactly.
So like,
it did obviously win a Nationals in the weekend. That was its first and only. But again, a couple of very prominent and some of the best players in the world with it in their hands, top 8ing Nationals. I actually think though that if a Warrior is still... so my note on this was Warriors are at sea ultimately, I think, but it's close. So I think they have some challenges with that ability to convert their 5-card hands. They can convert 5-card hands, but often it's not powerful enough the way they do it. And sometimes the opponent just doesn't care about what they do. They almost just get lost kind of in the middle. Like they just don't... Their consistency is fine, but it's like at a very low end. You were talking about agency of Kasai earlier in the pod, right? But I actually think that's the reason why I think if it's anything, it's Dawnblade Dory, because you say, well, you have to interact with me, you have to respect what I'm doing, you have to defend me, otherwise I will do better math than you. And I still think that is a good matchup into Gravy as Dory, but I haven't played a lot of it, so...
Yeah, I feel like it's gotten worse since like the first few weeks of Gravy, as Gravy's understand. But I do agree. I think it's probably still on the more positive end. It's not as good, and I do think you do suffer against like Slippy, for example.
Yeah.
When you bring Dawnblade Dory versus like your Kasai, right? Your Kasai into Slippy, you're just chilling. But then you play Dawnblade Dory into Slippy, and suddenly like, your hands are just a little bit more vulnerable. So then it's weird. It do feels like you kind of take a hit somewhere in the other top 5 decks, depending on whether you go Dawnblade or you go a 2-handed Warrior. Like
I said, it's close. I think it's close, but I think it's ultimately just not quite there. I think they're obviously. I personally think that's closer than Azalea though, to being playable in this format.
Oh yeah, I could see it. I still find I think the power level is just a little low. Yeah. There's need a little bit more like juice, like a couple of like stronger power turns that aren't reliant on your opponent letting everything hit. You know, like Kasai's like when she does a big blood on hands turn, you're like, oh, this is impressive. But it's just like she needed like to see the spoils earlier. She needed the spoils to hit, and it's just like
She
needs some level of power turns like the other heroes have, where it doesn't matter what the opponent did allowed you to do.
She needs 3 more spoils,
and you can just do
what
it.
she needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts on any of the heroes that you want to kind of discuss? Next week we will go through, our full predictions for metagame spreads, in terms of what we think will, top 8, what will win, what we think might change. Of course, we will have Kuala Lumpur results before then, which could change things. I guess there's actually one final hero I want to ask you about, if that's all right.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I was going to bring up this hero on my own as like the final thought.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
How do you know it's this? Is it Marionette? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Mario.
Where is Arakni Marionette? Ultimately, it took 2 wins in this national season, so in line with Kano and Ocilio, the Wizard Brothers hanging out there. But I guess, does it come back into play if Slippy is the most represented deck at this PT, or is there just too many other concerns in that top 5 that sort of keep Marionette out?
So with Slippy being the new deck with a target on his back, I feel like one of the first places to go to is Marionette, right? I think you think about Slippy's like worst matchups, Marionette's like up there. So yeah, again, it's like how do you do into the other 4? And I do maintain that I think you are happier to be on the Mario side against Cindra than you're on the Cindra side. I think I'd much rather be playing Arakni Marionette into Cindra than playing Cindra into Arakni Marionette. So I think the 2 like aggressive decks within his top 5, I'm pretty happy to be on Marionette. Verdance, I don't really think you're solving that matchup while retaining your good matchups in Cindra and Slippy, so I think you should accept that you just have a negative Verdance matchup. Big questions, I think, are the Prism and Gravy. Prism, I think you can get... I think Prism is like fine. Like you put 7s in your deck, which like maybe you put in Blanches to help you against both Prism and Gravy. Like maybe you can... There's a unique 7 in that form where it's like you can help against both those matchups at the same time to help conserve your sideboard slots. But with a few 7s in a deck, I actually think a Prism is like in the coin flip territory. Gravy is, I think, the big one. If you are maintaining a negative Gravy matchup, then I feel like Marionette's a tough ask. Because raw power level wise, I do think that makes it slightly lower than Slippy or like just powerful in a different way. Yeah, the Gravy one is, I think, is just such a massive question mark because I do think there's a lot of flux still happening on the Gravy side of things as they've recognized that perhaps they're a bit more vulnerable to fatigue than they want it to be. Other people are recognizing, oh, you don't have Humperdinck, I'm going to punish you for it. So I do think there's like, yeah, there's still flux happening on the Gravy side where I feel like that matchup is still a bit of a question mark for me. I think if the Marionettes can get that matchup, say with like the Blanches or something, to be slightly positive, then I could be like Marionette seems to be a unique angle to the meta, but still, it's not like super convincing. And you might just be like, why don't I just play the powerful thing?
I think that's kind of where I'm at with Marionette. I think ultimately, to me, the hero doesn't have that fundamental consistency that we spoke about. It's a little bit less powerful than some of these other heroes, and I think its meta position is a little bit risky. So ultimately, I'm like, I don't think it's a good option for this PT. I think if you're looking for something to target Slippy, I actually think you have better options, personally, than trying to play. Like Victor, for instance, might be it, like you say.
I'll just Verdance, right?
Well, yeah,
if you feel like you go play Verdance, you try and figure out how to be better into like. Actually, I don't know. I just look at the other 4 matchups, the other 3, like the Prism, the Cindra, and the Gravy for like the Verdance. I'm like, oh, I guess if you can try and solve one of those somehow, then I'd rather.
Let me throw you this as the last thing though. So we think this is going to be a flatter meta spread than we've seen at any Pro Tour. I think we both agree on that, right? If Slippy is the most played deck, and then the other 4 decks combined are say 30%, Verdance is very good into almost everything else in this meta. That's a 70% of the field that you want to play into. That might be good enough for some people to say to pull the trigger.
That's the big thing, right? I think coming back to like the Marionette versus Verdance, where like you're kind of having a good Slippy matchup, so which one's better? Well, it's like, yeah, again, there's more than 40. I think we both agree it'll be 40% or more of the field is not these top 5 decks, and you'd much rather just be on the Verdance compared to the Marionette. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think that's what's keeping Verdance in the top 5 decks as well, where she's just raw power level, strong, consistent, put into anything else.
That's also why I think ultimately the top 5 decks will be, as a percentage of the meta, will be similar to the top 5 decks of London, because people, the spread will be flatter within. I think people will still be like, well, I could play this thing, or I could just play Verdance, which I know and is still powerful and has actually a similar matchup spread to the thing I'm considering. Or, oh, I could do that, or I could just play the other aggro deck, one of the other 2 aggro decks of, if people are like, oh, I could play Azalea, or I could play Vincent, or I could play Auxilia, or whatever, and they're just like, or KO, or Ira, or whatever it is, and like, well, or I could just play Cindra or Slippy. I think so many people are just going to be faced with that decision at the end of the day, and they're going to decide on one of those 5 decks.
Are you a Dash.io enjoyer at all? It feels like Dash.io is sort of like... Like, Dash.io has a decent Prism match.
Yeah.
As far as, like, an aggro deck.
IO,
which is quite nice.
IO is the ultimate deck roulette deck. We spoke about gem roulette. If you want to play roulette with your deck, play Dash.io, because I think Dash.io is very powerful, and the best Dash.io players in the world are really good at getting a lot of consistency out of that deck. Ultimately, I think personally it is not enough consistency, and you lose games to yourself. You lose, like when I say yourself, I mean your deck, and you peer into some of these heroes and they just have their best draw, or all their defensive cards line up really well, plus like 1 or 2 pieces of disruption, and you can't do anything about it. It's like, oh, I play into Verdance, they block me out, they play 2 CNCs at the right time, and I just lose. It's like, wow, okay, what a game.
Yeah, the timing is I think what can mess up Dash. Like, there is the aspect of your deck order and like whether you're actually cranking items off the top or not. But also, you play against a Slippy and they just bonds you, and they just this was not the hand to be bonds. Any other hand you would have been fine, but this hand we're holding Spark of Genius and like something else is like, I just not this one, and then you just kind of.
I have a story about that, and I think both parties will be fine with me to tell you this, because I don't think anyone's considering playing the deck. But Tom Dowling, friend of the show, friend of mine, Dash.io enjoyer, brought Dash.io to prominence with his second place calling finish when everyone, was obviously not yet with Dash.io, he played it at Nationals and was like trying to convince Dan, my friend and testing partner, that he should play IO for Singapore. And Dan is a big IO enjoyer. He wanted to play it for Osaka, but ultimately ended up playing Enigma, but really loves IO. And he's like, okay, cool, I'll play some games. Played 2 games into Slippy, and he got absolutely destroyed. And he was like, yeah, no, I'm not playing this hero. Drew terribly in one game, and then the other game just got hit by like a well-timed bonds and was like, yeah, no, I'm not playing this hero.
I will say though, her fridge is actually kind of scary. If people haven't played against recent builds of Dash, with the new gloves, and then they put adaptive plating in the boots, right? So just plating in the boots with the new gloves is 5 block on demand on just arms and legs, on top of already having Crown Providence as a headpiece and Foundry Heart as a chest piece. Like, she actually has a Runeblade level fridge, which I think it's something. I haven't played against Dash.io, you do need to at least like see what the fridge is like, because that part did throw me off when I played against a recent build of it. I was like, wait, how come you suddenly have this big of a fridge? I was expecting it to be a little more fragile, and I was like, oh my god. It is a Runeblade level fridge, but yeah, it still suffers from the consistency.
I agree. Anything else you want to add, or should we wrap it up?
I think that's it.
Dude, this format is so interesting. I don't feel particularly good heading into this Pro Tour from just choosing a deck. I usually either feel really confident about the deck I'm going to play or feel really confident about the limited format. I feel neither heading into this Pro Tour, and that scares me a lot. But there's still time. I'm having a lot of fun playing a lot of these games, I would say. I'm actually enjoying like 1 or 2 heroes that are on my current consideration list way more than I thought I'd be enjoying them. I'm playing one of these top 5 heroes, by the way. That is, I think, well, yes, I think there's a slim outside chance, but I feel like every event I go to, I'm like, yeah, I have a slim outside chance of playing, or sometimes a big outside chance of playing one of these not top heroes, and I ultimately almost never end up playing it. I think I've done it once, so I'm almost certainly playing one of these top 5 heroes. But yeah, I've been enjoying my games quite a bit.
You'll show up to a testing house saying, I'm considering this one off-meta pick, but everyone knows that when the day comes, you're registering one of the things that's meant.
Yeah, well, your call was I was going to play Gravy, so we will see.
Yes. Yeah, we'll see. He's in the top 5.
It's true. It's true. I almost played Max Nitro at World Championship, so, there's been darker times. That's for
exactly. Sure. You showed up to Barcelona saying, guys, I'm considering Max, and we're just like, okay.
I literally, like, I had like, I had all the cards bought for me and everything. Like I purchased the cards like the week before to come to Barcelona so I could play the deck. Like I was like, I'm playing this deck, and then the day before I was playing reps and just got the coldest of feet playing into like Dromai, and I think Phi was the aggro deck at the time. Probably makes sense. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Barcelona.
And then I was
Yeah.
just like, and then the Icelander matchup, I like was like so confident, and then I lost 2 in a row, and I was like, I'm playing Dromai. Just grabbing Dromai out of my bag.
Yep. And then you show up to Osaka being like, guys, I'm gonna play Dash IO, and then the night before you're like, nope, see you
No, I
Enigma.
think
That's
I think
where
I
it's
was
at.
more on Enigma, but I was just gonna play normal Enigma, and then I realized just how cracked CYB was like about 4 days before, and I was like, there's just no way you can't play this deck. So
And it was the correct call. It did win the event. So.
yeah, I did. I mean, I didn't do well at Worlds, but I top 16 the calling. Lost my 2 mirrors for win-ins at the calling. Is what it is. All right, that has been episode 221 of Arsenal Pass. I did not Living Legend -IE, but maybe I could Living Legend Azalea next weekend. Who knows? We'll find out if that will be the case. Not at all. But much to talk about as we head into Singapore. Join us next week for our preview show of Pro Tour Singapore. Some of it will definitely be live from Singapore. Pankaj is, at least 50% of it is live from Singapore because that's where Pankaj is. But make sure to tune in. And if you are playing Kuala Lumpur this weekend or you're going to be in Singapore, first of all, come say hi to us. But most of all, good luck. Have great games of Flesh and Blood, and we will see you in the next pod.